Let's take a look at some ways that instructors can help manage cognitive load for students. This first tip is one I already mentioned. Give students regular practice at what they are learning. Here you are seeing a practice quiz in Canvas that allows students to retake the quiz as many times as they like. I'll explain how this is an example of practice in a moment. If students are learning a skill, then practice likely involves engaging repeatedly in that skill or elements of that skill. It could also involve applying that skill to a variety of contexts and situations. If students are learning information and concepts, then practice will likely involve practice remembering that information, as well as eventually applying it to relevant situations and contexts. Again, practice reduces cognitive load because practice makes knowing, remembering, and using what has been learned more automatic. And the more automatic something is, the less cognitive load it carries, the less space in working memory it takes up. There are many different ways to give students practice. One of my favorite activities are practice quizzes, preferably ones that students can take multiple times. The beauty with multiple attempts is that each time students take the quiz, they are deepening their learning. This is because of something referred to as the testing effect. The testing effect is the observation through lots and lots of research that taking a test on something actually strengthens memory for that material. Taking a test is really the same as studying. In fact, it is better than most study techniques. This is because students practice remembering what has been learned as they take the test. So, the more attempts, the more practice at remembering. I also like having regular class discussions where students are asked to apply what they are learning. Here you can see an online discussion board, but in-person class discussions do this as well. Tip number 2 is to break larger projects up into multiple smaller assignments, even if it is just a part 1 and a part 2. Many students try to tackle large assignments all in one sitting, and they are going to be cognitively overloaded. Instead of having the whole thing due at once, consider having students complete it in parts, with each part having a different due date. This will help by reducing the number of steps students need to complete at one time, and it breaks up the cognitive load of the project into more manageable segments. It also gives you a chance to give students feedback and guidance through the process. When giving feedback to students, limit the number of things for students to focus on. More feedback isn't always better. Too much feedback can overwhelm students, and they may miss the really important feedback because it is hiding in all of the other less important comments. Consider identifying the top things that a given student needs to work on, and be sure to also fit in what students are doing well. Number 4 is to limit the number of new ideas packed into a lesson. Students are really limited in how much new information they can learn in one sitting, especially when they don't have extensive background knowledge of the field to use and make sense of the new information. More information is not necessarily better. In fact, you may find that your students actually learn more if you present less because you are not overloading them cognitively, and they will actually have room in their working memory to process and work with the new information. A secondary problem that comes with too much new information presented at once is that big ideas and key concepts, that information that is most relevant to the course, can get lost in all of those less important details. When there is lots of new information, not only is there a risk of forgetting much of it or not processing it in the first place, but it makes it more difficult for students to identify the big concepts and ideas that matter most. This is because they generally don't have the extensive background knowledge needed to distinguish the need to know key information from the nice to know but not critical information. And in case you haven't found Waldo yet, there he is. This is more so what that same information looks like to us as instructors and experts in our field, because we do possess the background knowledge needed to pinpoint the big ideas out of the ancillary details. So we want to make it more like this for our students, essentially to increase the signal to noise. So what can we do to increase that signal to noise? Well, we want to make sure we are really highlighting those big ideas, explicitly pointing them out to students. You can say, hey, this is really important. Write it down in your notes and put a star by it. You can do like I do sometimes and put your important idea all by itself on a slide to really emphasize it. Also, make sure you bring those key ideas up more than once. Remind students of those big ideas and present them in different contexts throughout the semester. Also, spend less time lecturing and more time on active methods of learning that are centered around those big ideas, themes, or key concepts. Get students to engage in some way with the big ideas so that they stand out. And keep in mind that you don't need to cover everything in the textbook. Some instructors wonder if they lecture less, how will they cover everything in the textbook? Instead, focus on the learning outcomes of the course. Identify the key ideas for the course and make sure your lessons support those key ideas. If students understand the big ideas, they will be well equipped to handle the other content you didn't get to. Another problem is putting too much information on a presentation slide. A slide like this is absolutely going to carry a heavy cognitive load for students. And the reason isn't just because there is a lot of information. A problem with a text-heavy slide like this is that students can't read the text and listen to what the instructor is saying at the same time. If the instructor instead shows an image while explaining what students need to know, it is much easier for students to process both what they are seeing on the slide and hearing the instructor say. So this is another point I want to emphasize. Students can't read text and listen to speech at the same time. So, consider reducing the amount of text on slides as much as possible. Remember that you will be orally presenting as well. Not all information needs to be displayed in the slide. However, it can be helpful to visually display key terms and concise definitions. Because of the transient nature of speech, once it has been said, it's gone. Visually presenting key text can help students to get it into their notes, and it can help to emphasize it so that they are more likely to write it down in their notes. The key with visually displaying text to students is to keep it as concise as possible, since students have to both read it and listen to what's being said at the same time. So, while this slide is better than what we started with, it is still a bit information heavy. Don't be afraid to spread information across more than one slide if you need to. It is often recommended to present just one main idea per slide. Here I have broken the information up across 3 slides. Also, if you have a relevant image that supports the main idea of the slide, then incorporate one, like we can see here. Hopefully you notice how much easier it is to listen while looking at an image than it is to listen while reading text. So incorporating relevant images into your slides can help students learn better. However, do avoid irrelevant images. Irrelevant images can actually add unnecessary cognitive load. While a polar bear on some ice may be remotely related to the analogy of an iceberg, it doesn't directly support the message that is being conveyed. It would be better to have no image at all. Also, skip the decorative template for your presentation slides. The water droplets on this slide look nice, but they add unnecessary cognitive load. Work to make your slides simple. Okay, let's review the ways we can reduce cognitive load for our students. We talked about giving students practice. Break larger projects up into parts. Limit feedback to the most important points. Limit the number of new ideas per lesson. Highlight big ideas. Reduce the amount of text on a slide. Present one main idea per slide. Use relevant images. And finally, avoid irrelevant images. Finally, take a moment to reflect on what you have just learned. Doing so will help it stick around in memory longer, and it will reduce the cognitive load of holding on to and using that information later. What key ideas are you taking away with you from this video? What do you think will be the most memorable for you? What are you going to follow up on and learn more about? What might you try with your own students?